Hello, Nitasha. It's really lovely to have you here. And we've been really trying to get this together for a while. So you've got a busy program. We're really grateful that you have joined us here. So thanks so much for coming.
Thank you, Louise.
Okay.
And
So great.
you are the lucky winner of something new that we are going to be trying for the very first time.
Wow.
Yeah, we like to innovate as we go.
Yes.
So we are going to have like 3 or 4 icebreaker questions.
Okay, is that I'm winning the what?
Let's just see where we go with this.
Okay, cool.
So
Go for it. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you. This
It's
is such
such
a cool setup. I love it.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah,
So
I love
pleased
it.
that you came. Okay. So first question. Have you ever in your life sworn at a 2-point plug?
Oh, absolutely. Especially with the socket being round. Yes.
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 So
You can't think that long, Dewald.
no,
You've
no,
got to get with the
I've got
program.
there's a couple here. Imagine your toothbrush was alive and kept a journal. What do you think it wrote about you last night?
My toothbrush.
Yes.
Say, why do you have to use me that long?
And if you
Enough.
we always lose a sock somewhere along the line. What do you say to the other sock to make it come back?
I will find you a partner, baby. Don't worry. In this world, not everybody matches together, but we work together.
Okay.
Honestly, really, I wear mixed match socks all the time. It does the job.
It does the
and
job.
it's so cool.
Yes.
Yes.
So that's just, sometimes people, we thought we must just do this and just kind of
Just
break
see how
the
it
ice
goes.
and see how it goes.
So
Yeah.
please introduce yourself and tell us who you are.
Okay. I am a very easygoing, fun-loving, creative person that brings a lot of wealth and I would say spice into discussions, connections, relationships, my work, my personal life, etc. I'm a mom. I have 2 amazing sons. I live in an extended family system, so I'm the sandwich generation. So
Okay.
I have my seniors and my juniors, so there's never a dull moment.
Okay.
And I have a wonderful career of having been exposed to environmental management. And now I'm transitioning into the agricultural environment, which is just so full of life and so full of everything green and wonderful and awesome. So that's who I am. I think where I am now speaks a lot to my personality and who I am. And yeah, I really am having the time of my life. I'm learning so many new things. It's keeping me young. It's keeping me vibrant. And it's keeping me serving. So for 20 years, I've been in government. I've served. I've done a lot of work on policy, etc. And now I'm finding I'm working so much closer to the ground. And I'm really working with people. And I'm using my knowledge to really help people. So that is very rewarding, very fulfilling for me. Yeah, I don't know what else
Wonderful.
you'd like to know. Yeah.
No, thank you very much. And you've kind of described what you're doing, but what is your official title at Hortgro? Let's put that long title of yours on the table.
Yes. So I'm the resource manager and sustainability manager. So it's resource management and sustainability manager.
Okay.
So if you unpack that, it's essentially just assisting our agricultural sector, specifically the palm and stone fruit, the deciduous fruit sector, to be using our resources a little bit more conservatively, efficiently, wisely, so that we can be sustainable as a business and that we can also be environmentally sustainable.
Okay, it's becoming more and more and more of a front of house issue. The whole sustainability, environmental sustainability. Look, we know as a farmer, if you need to be sustainable, the first sustainable is economically sustainability. But in the process, to be mindful of the environment and obviously also the people that work in the area and so on. So tell us about how are things going with you at Hortgro? What are you seeing? What are you learning?
I think let's start with what's your experience, because
Yes.
just before we started, you said you've got a 20-year experience in resource management. Now, if you say to anybody, off the street, what is a resource manager? They would think it's a bank manager. But you're not talking about those resources.
No.
It's water
So,
and
yes,
soil and all
yes.
that.
But what Louise was talking about, like being sustainable as a business, is so critical. You can't be a sustainable business and not take into consideration your environmental, how you use your environmental resources, how you use your human resources and the people you work with. So say sustainable business has all of that. And in the field of work that I'm doing, it's called ESG, environment, social, and governance issues, which makes a business thrive and profitable and sustainable. So when it comes to what I've done before, I've done resource management on water pollution, land pollution, and it's essentially guiding industry and businesses as well as the general public on how to make better choices in terms of utilization of our resources. When I say resources, it's all God-given resources like water, our energy, input costs like fertilizer, for example, is what I'm learning now in agriculture. Input costs are really, really important when it comes to resource management. So what you put into anything that you're doing is a resource,
Yes.
including people, human resource. So as a resource manager, I bring a lot of knowledge from my previous engagements and my previous work on policy development, pollution prevention, management of those resources so that we don't tip that edge where we cannot recover what we've got. Because, for example, water is a very scarce resource and it's something that we can run out of very quickly if it's not managed properly. Land, the same with land. We're running out of good, fertile agricultural land. And therefore, we need to have interventions in place to bring back the resource to a stage or a situation or a manner in which we can still derive benefit from it. So that's essentially what resource management is. And I've worked on policy before. I've worked on authorizations and a permitting system. I've worked on emergency incidents. And all of those little elements I'm now bringing into what I'm doing at Hortgro with the deciduous fruit sector when it comes to climate change, when it comes to managing our resources. So yeah, it's very relevant, and I really am enjoying the other side of it. So I'm not doing the policy development anymore. I'm now actually even commenting on the policies
Oh, wow.
from a different perspective, which is quite rewarding.
So 20 years ago, when you went down this rabbit hole of doing this, climate change and sustainability and all these things weren't big buzzwords back then. So I always say that, how did you explain yourself, or how were you received when you arrive at somebody, irrespective of what industry it is, and you've got to talk to them about this, especially if it's not something that they have ever considered or thought of. And I just saw a meme on Facebook now of somebody says something happened 20 years ago. You think of 1980. It's actually 2005. It was,
Yes, absolutely.
it's
Yes.
It's crazy that we do think 80s, 1980s when we think 20
Exactly.
years back. But when I got into environmental management, I've actually got a qualification in environmental health and environmental management. So there's that relationship between our human health on the environment as well as the health or the impact of the environment on our health, and vice versa. So when I started to study the environmental issues, etc., it was hot and coming. It was just the right time.
Okay.
Our first Environmental Management Act came out in 2008. Yeah, you see? So it's just like not that far away, but such a lot has happened since 2008. So before we even went into the environmental section, industries had to start to do environmental management systems for their products and how they were developing products. So industrialization was being impacted by environmental stuff. Development, sustainable development became the buzzword. So, for example, in order for you to build a house, or in order for a town to be developed fully, you need to go through environmental authorizations to actually determine if this is sustainable. Is this development going to have a negative impact a couple of years down the line? So sustainable development became a big buzzword. In 2002, we had that first World Summit on Sustainable Development. That was 2002. I was still studying at that time. And then everything just started to be birthed. As far back as 1991, 1992, we already had the United Nations framework on Convention framework on climate change issues. So that was in the 1990s, and then it moved on to the WSSD, which then became the driving force for let's take sustainable development and the environmental issues seriously. And then it just burst after that. Then we had the Paris Agreement, which came out in a couple of years, 2015, 2016. That is then a global agreement for countries to say, let's do something about global warming and climate change. Because by then, all countries have started to get the effects of climate change and started to take it a little more seriously. So 20 years ago was just the right time to get into this field. And although I wasn't doing climate change fundamentally as a core issue, I was doing pockets of it in different elements, like we call it cleaner production, which is resource efficiency. How do you use your resources properly so that you don't pollute? I was doing like chemicals management plans for industry. We were doing policy development on how do we conserve chemicals management so that we don't have water pollution. We were doing things like commenting on sewage wastewater and that into coastal waters and into freshwater systems. I was doing things on like water reserve management, water resource management, and dams, and all of those elements of climate change. You see it as far-fetched, but it's actually such a big element of climate change, because if you don't conserve your water, and if we don't have enough reserves, or we don't have enough rainfall because of climate change and climate shifts, it impacts first on our water. And we know how important water is. I mean, agriculture hinges on the availability of good quality and quantity of water.
Not just agriculture, everybody.
Everybody, absolutely.
Because everything downstream from agriculture ends up in a big water reservoir that supplies nearby towns.
Yes.
Again.
Yes.
Like even to take this building we're sitting in the old tannery.
Yes,
We're right next to
this place has got a very interesting history when it comes to that as well.
Yeah, right at the back here is a river. And when was it, in the early 2000s that we read, I think this place was producing 140,000 square meters of leather per month.
Wow.
This building
and the water was integral to that. In fact, it was Wellington was nicknamed Smellington because this place was very smelly, and they used a lot of heavy metals and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's all been cleaned up now, and we now have this space as a office space. But as you were saying, it all impacts the factories, and the things that get used at factories and things impact the environment around them.
Yeah.
And so we are right here at a place like that.
So it's a system-wide approach. So we'll always have downstream users and upstream users of any water reserve. So it's just each user needs to be very mindful on their impact, both discharge as well as abstraction. Because, for example, if I'm upstream and I abstract more than I need or more than I'm allowed to, it's going to impact those downstream.
Yes.
And if I don't put back the water in a quality that is usable for the next person downstream, then I'm infringing on their constitutional right, which is a right to have a healthy environment and access an environment that is accessible and healthy for their well-being, etc. So it's really a system-wide approach, and water is just one element of it.
Sure.
Okay, so you've done a really great job of sketching the scenario. Now tell us how that fits in with your job at Hortgro. How are you implementing this? How's the process going? Yeah. What are you seeing? What are you doing? Be interesting to hear.
So my portfolio at Hortgro is essentially to ensure that we manage the resources in a way that allows the business to be sustainable. And we have like a couple of key strategic objectives, but the core focus areas of work that I do focuses on climate change mitigation. And we can go quite a lot in detail about that. There's a lot of things happening. There's a lot of things we're doing at Hortgro to prepare our farmers and our growers to just prepare themselves for any impacts. Then we've got technology and innovative technology. Everything you see that's happening in the space, in the green space, has got an element of technology in it. So being innovative in a space like this is critical for our survival as a business. And then all the green ag tech and like precision agriculture and remote sensing, all the research that goes into making industry as robust and as mainstream as possible happens with innovative technology. Water and energy go together, so there's a lot of work that we're doing in terms of water benchmarking, energy consumption, looking at more renewable options, because we have a very dirty fuel source. And that then translates into our carbon emissions, which is going to impact us with all the requirements we have to adhere to. ESG, which I spoke about right at the onset, which is environment, social, and governance issues of any business. And that is businesses reporting compliance so that our retailers and consumers can have access to how their fruit is produced. So we're in a time now where everybody wants to know how their food is being produced and the impact that it's going to have on them. So ESG compliance is a big aspect of what I do, and we can also unpack that. There's quite a lot of information on that alone. And it's not just us, it's everybody that's having to do this kind of reporting, which is basically just a reputational thing, and also helps us to keep our market access. I mean, Hortgro, with the deciduous sector, we are like the 6th largest fruit exporter in the world. So we export to 86 countries, and we have to keep those market access open. And then we've got plastics and packaging issues, which also translate into ESG, climate change, etc. So those are the kind of focus areas we have, and it's very cross-cutting. So, for example, ESG matters, or let's just say packaging and plastics. It's just not about sustainable plastics. It's also about how do we use packaging and plastics to enhance the fruit life, the shelf life. So when it reaches our consumer, it's in a condition that's good enough for consumption. It's what they paid for. There's no food lost along the way. So we have to integrate all these different aspects to ensure that we have a thriving sector. We have a business that's sustainable, and that our farmer efforts are not just down the drain. So it goes from farm level along the entire value chain to our exporters, also to our retailers. So my work focuses on ensuring that that common thread of sustainability is realized throughout. And Hortgro focuses on communicating all the mainstream ideas or the important aspects or what's coming globally to our farmers, to our exporters, so we're on the same page. And we have a very good Hortgro science element, which is basically our research house of Hortgro that does research for the industry that would help industry to make a decision based on profitability, sustainability, and good agricultural practices.
So how involved are you when an international supermarket is all of a sudden say, no more plastic? How involved would you be on when that comes and says, no, listen, we are in South Africa, we cannot have no plastic, we want to ship our stuff, it must stay fresh.
Yes.
So what role would you play in something like that? Because we always find that a lot of the things being imposed on the growers comes from as a requirement of the end market.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, our consumer decisions hinge heavily on what we do on this side and vice versa. So we have to take that into cognizance. But it actually doesn't come as a surprise when our consumers say we want this and we want that and we don't want to go down this route anymore. And our exporters and our producers have to comply in a way, but it becomes very distressful because it's not easy to just transition. For example, plastics, we've been using it for loads of years and it works. And for a consumer to say we don't want plastics anymore has to actually be researched. It has to be voiced in a way that everybody is actually saying no plastic. So we've had this in 2018, 2019, where, for example, there was a ban on single-use plastics. And that was now coming from the EU, the
in which
European
industry? In the agriculture industry?
in the agricultural sector, where the EU member states. Okay, let's back it up a bit. So, for example, there's the climate change issues where there's an international agreement. Everybody is saying, yes, we will do our efforts to combat climate change, etc. There's also the SDG goals, which is the Sustainable Development Goals. There's 17 goals, and there's like 196 member states that said, yes, we're all going to sit and determine these goals, and there's 17 of them. So they're all interrelated. One of them is to eliminate poverty by 2050 and 2030, to ensure food security, to have good agricultural practices, to move to a circular economy. There's 17 of them. One of them is climate change, climate action, and one of them is like proper sanitation, etc. So there's 17 of those goals that everybody actually says we're going to adhere to these SDG goals. Different countries have different ways to address the SDG goals. The EU, for example, came up with a farm to fork strategy, which essentially would be their way of policy development to say to the EU member states, we now are going to be very conscious of how our food is produced. We want to reach our SDG targets by 2030. Here's what we need to put in place. So the farm to fork strategy has got different things in it. And one of the things that had come about early, like a couple of years ago, was single-use plastics are now banned across the board. And now obviously for us, our liners are plastics.
Yeah.
Our bags that we put our fruits in are plastic. And it's usually
But it's-
single-use. You can't use it again. And it gets discarded. So we had to then look at ways in which, okay, so if this ban is going through, and for now it's the member states in the EU are going to have to comply with it. It's going to come to us as an exporting agent as well. How do we then prepare ourselves for it? So Hortgro had already started work on edible coatings. We started to look at different humidity controls, what really affects or prolongs the life of our fruit so that we can eliminate plastics. What are the alternatives? We already started to look at that. And then just a couple of years down the line, they said, okay, the single ban plastic is not going to work. France went down that line. And that didn't go very well because they started to use pulp and paper. The quality was not so great. It costs a lot more. And then that was so-called abolished and said, let's relook at a strategy that's going to work.
Yeah, but those things disappear very quietly.
Yes. So
Where they make a big noise about the no plastics, and then if
Yeah.
it doesn't work, then it goes.
So that's what we're trying to do. We're actually really trying to take away this distress and this element of surprise by saying, hang on, we're not the only one feeling the pressure. And let's look at this systematically. What are the alternatives? What can we do? What can we not do? What is not going to affect us, etc. So we belong to, South Africa belongs to Hortgro belongs to Fruit SA,
Yes.
or is a commodity grouping within Fruit SA. And Fruit SA is our voice for the international requirements regulating fruit and market access, etc. So we also belong to Freshfell. Fruit SA is also a partner, a member of Freshfell. And there's Freshfell Europe, which has been very active in the space to say we want people to eat more fruits and vegetables. It's healthy for people. But when it comes to all these requirements, let's relook at this. This is unfair for us as fruit to be subjected to no plastics, none of this, while other products can allow for it. So let's look at this collectively. And then there was the EU paper and packaging waste regulations that were now implemented since February this year.
Okay.
So that's a little bit better than the ban on single-use plastics because it has targets. It has targets for sectors in industry to say, okay, we won't say ban, but show us that you're using recycled plastic or products in your crates and things that can be recycled content in them. Show us that your products can be recycled in our country so that we do a circular economy and we look at it, it doesn't become a problem. And like in some countries where it clogs up the waterways and breaks down to microplastics, etc. So show us that you as a country are thinking about the management of your plastic right until it ends at your consumers. So we've started to look at that. But bearing that in mind that the EU member states have to first do that for themselves or within the EU member states regimes before they can even impose that on us as exporters. So we have a timeline. So by next year, there will be specifications, 2026, there will be specifications for what do we mean by recycled content? Where does it apply, etc. So now all the conversation starts to get unpacked around what are the requirements. If we produce our plastic, what must it comply with? So that conversation will start happening 2027, 2028, so that by 2030, we have zero plastics that are on the European Union shelves that cannot be recycled or do not have recycled content so that they meet their SDG targets. So this obviously has impact on us, and we're trying to look at alternatives. We're also trying to look at suppliers in South Africa where we can reformulate our plastics so that they meet the requirements. The only catch-22 is that we'll have to wait on the EU to tell us what these
And
requirements are.
then they want it tomorrow done.
Yeah, so there will have to be that, which is why Hortgro is not waiting on that. We're
Yeah.
already putting out requests for this kind of research. We've already done research on edible coatings. There aren't any specifications around regulations around biofilms and coating, so we're not going down that road now. We're just trying to see where we can just get on par with our EU member states and not have any impact on our market access as the years unfold.
I also know that
Yeah.
there's quite a negative connotation from the consumers towards edible coatings.
Yeah, so therefore it needs to be regulated.
Exactly.
Sometimes it has a sticky feel or doesn't look right, etc. So those things have
Or they
to be
just want to know what's
regulated.
in it, what it's made of.
Yes, absolutely. That's
If you
why
put
it's
if
so
you put it in your
important.
body, you are
Yes.
well, within your right to ask about it. But I want to know about the alternatives to plastics. I mean, obviously, if we're going to go down this road, and we're going to get to some point where we can, whenever it is, it might be it will be a long time from now, where we replace plastics completely with something else. Someone's got to pay for that something else to be developed and to be implemented. And plastic, we all know the negative side, but we know the positive side of it, how incredibly well it works for moisture shielding
Yeah.
on everything. So alternatives, what are you seeing? What are you finding? What has been researched so far? What can you tell us?
Yeah. So I think let's be honest, plastic is a fantastic product. Like you said, it keeps moisture, which is critical for us as a fruit exporter, especially with the long haul that we have with our fruit exports. It assists with the barrier. It has like a barrier prevention from other pests and diseases. And we can also put in implements or methods to reduce the ripening of fruit, which is really important so that it at least reaches our retailers and consumers in a way that still has a shelf life on their shelf. So plastics is not the demon. I would always say plastics is not the demon. The management of plastics is the most important. And I think companies and businesses around the world are starting to understand this. Therefore, we have this whole circular economy of how plastics are produced, what's happening to it along the value chain, where is it ending up, and who takes responsibility for that. So there's something called the extended producer responsibility. So the producer of the plastic or the product needs to take responsibility to actually ensure that if, for example, if it's crates, plastic crates, that it's being reused at the consumer's end or brought back, etc., at their own costs, etc. So it does become a very expensive exercise. When it comes to alternatives, we've already started to implement some of those alternatives. Like some of the plastics are really not necessary. Like, for example, when we were packaging the corner pieces, just to keep the box aligned and together, the corner pieces used to be plastic. We've done away with that now, and we've got pulp side corner pieces.
And it must be virgin.
It doesn't necessarily have to be virgin because it's not in contact with the food. But our
Yes.
plastics...
But to absorb moisture.
Yes.
The virgin corner pieces can allow a lot more moisture before it collapses.
Yeah, but this is quite strong. When I looked at it and I touched it, I could not tell that it was from pulp. It was so compacted that it actually felt and looked like plastic.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
It's strange how people overlook something like a corner piece on a pallet because
Yes.
it's an integral part of the stability of the thing.
Absolutely.
And you also don't want your box of grapes or apples or citrus crushed on the way there.
Absolutely.
Because that's a much bigger mess to deal
Yeah,
with.
yeah, absolutely. So the corner pieces are really important. So we've already started to change that. The straps, instead of having 10,000 different color codes, we're just keeping it as a normal white, so it's easy to recycle, etc.
Okay.
We started to use pulp trays as well.
Yes, I've seen
because
those.
polystyrene, we don't have an alternative. That is still being researched here in South Africa. And if there are overseas requirements for recycling polystyrene, we actually need those specifications. So polystyrene is still in use because it is fantastic. Sometimes the cartons or the pulp trays abrase the fruit and it may not be ideal. So we're looking at that. But now if you look at those pulp trays, they're smooth and they look really good. So we're starting to look at alternatives like that. PVC used to be a big problem. So now in the fruit sector, we actually replaced PVC with LDPE, which is low density polyethylene. And that is fantastic.
Where's that used?
Okay, so we have a box. I wish I could have just brought
No, that's
one.
fine.
There's
We
a box
work
with
with
the inner lining.
Yes.
The
We
inner
know.
lining is it used to be 60 microns of plastic. It's now thin down to 25 micron plastic, which means we're using less plastic altogether.
A third.
So that has been trial and tested. It's used. The bags that we're using, the see-through bags that you see with the pears in it and the pictures and the labels and stuff, that's the LDPE bags that we
Okay.
use.
Okay.
So we're doing away with the tags as well, the things that cannot be recycled, the little unnecessary things, the bread clips kind of thing that used to be on. So there's a huge drive to educate our pack houses on what is actually unnecessary plastic and what is actually useful and what are the alternatives and what can be reused, etc. We have something at Hortgro called the Pack House Action Group for
Yes, I've heard of it.
for our POEMS users. So they have already started to work on a component list. And the component list was essentially using Tesco. Tesco is one of our retailers in the UK. Using Tesco requirements to say what they will not accept anymore and what alternatives we should be moving towards. So that was a very nice exercise done by the Pack House Action Group. And they highlighted the things we needed to transition to and do away with. And so that was really helpful. And that's some of the work we're doing. Research alternatives, we're trying to look at biofilms and edible coatings. There's not a lot of other research alternatives, I could say, because sometimes going through an R&D exercise is just not just about research. You got to get the supplies. You got to know that it's working in your country. It can serve the benefit of what it's intended for, rather than just ticking a box and saying, okay, we need an alternative. So it's a huge exercise. It takes a number of years. So we're very careful to say we're putting new products out there. We cannot. These products have to be trial and tested. It has to be food grade, accredited food grade plastics, etc. So we will then have to just wait on the EU specifications and requirements to say where and how we need to fulfill these requirements, so that at least when our products reaches the EU market, which is one of our biggest consumers and retailers, we then know our plastics are not going to be the reason for them to discredit it and bring it back. And there's a huge economic loss in that sense. So we'll do every effort we can. As a fruit essay is also helping in terms of advising on where best to go with this. We know countries like the USA and Canada have already started to look at alternatives, and their response to the EU PPR is that, let's just be fair, let's look at the solutions. What are the EU requirements, etc. So on the other side is the Global Plastics Pact. We have a South African Plastics Pact. The UK has got a UK Plastics Pact, and that's basically companies, government, stakeholders coming together to say, you know what, let's get rid of all these unnecessary plastics. We have targets set, global targets, and then each country sets their targets. Like plastic straws. You remember the whole debacle on plastic straws and the alternatives.
That should have been one of our icebreaker questions. Have you sworn at a paper straw before?
How many times?
Because there's an example. Plastic straws were fantastic. They still are. But now, because that's something that you can do about plastics, you're going to go and buy yourself a paper straw. And it's not the same.
So we had that kind of discussion with the biodegradable plastics. Yes, it's well and good, but for us, in a sector that transports our fruit over such a long haul, and we have no control as to how long that product will actually sit on a shelf or what, and we don't know whether it starts to disintegrate and biodegrade while it's on the shelf.
Exactly.
So those are kind of alternatives we started to look at. Compostable plastics is something that we're looking at as well, especially labels. They must be industrially compostable by the time they get to the
So what does industrially compostable mean?
Meaning it's not home compostable. So you can send it to
a landfill.
No, you can send it to an industry or a sector to be recycled, as opposed to you putting it into your compost bin at home and it's home composted. So it does disintegrate, it can compost, but industrially compostable meaning, okay, I can send it to
Yes.
like a chicken farm with a composting heap. I don't know. I'm just making an example. But an industry that actually takes it back, composts it part of its process. So it's industrially compostable, meaning it has to be collected. There must be infrastructure for that. There must be a system for that, etc. So there's also talk of having labels and certain things, just labels we're talking about for now, that especially those sticker ones that you find on individual fruit,
Yes.
that must be
PLUs.
home compostable or industrially compostable. So we wait on those requirements. It doesn't make a difference like on a very small scale, but on a large scale, if you have like tons of that collected, it does make a difference.
Of course.
The interesting thing is, and remember the family friend I told you about that works for one of the supermarkets
Yes.
that is also on the sustainability side? I can't remember exactly which
Yes.
supermarket she is.
The UK
Yeah,
supermarket.
it's a big UK retailer, and one of the things that she told me is that on, for instance, a milk bottle, like she said, the label must be recyclable, the lid must be recyclable, and the bottle itself.
Yeah.
But the bottle cannot be recycled if it's not washed out.
Yeah.
So who knows that? Who when they finish their milk,
Needs to rinse it out.
you need to rinse it out, because if it's not rinsed out, it goes to landfill. That's a problem. I think a lot of these things are more an educational problem with the end consumer than what it is for the producer or the packer grower people.
So if you talk to, for example, plastic recyclers or the Plastic Recycling Organization of South Africa or PETCO or whatever, they would say to you a large proportion of our bottles, although they are recyclable, they cannot be recycled because of the quality of it. So for example, if you discard like we, when I worked at government, we did a whole river cleanup system, and we used booms to collect the plastics that were coming downstream before it goes out into ports and harbors and sea. So a lot of that plastic is already tarnished by the sun. The color is gone. It's mixed. It could not be recycled grade. So it goes for either crafting or it goes for proper disposal. Instead of it being marine pollution and washing up on shore and breaking down into microplastics.
So I would say the same would account for these things you see on the internet, those big the ocean
cleanup thing.
Yes,
Yeah.
the same would probably account for that.
So everything has to be graded, and you have to ensure that it is recyclable quality for it to be recycled. So as much as we say the bottle can be recycled, it's actually, like I said, it's the management of the plastic and what you do with your stuff that's most important in this, and the education and awareness is so important.
There's something more though. There's the packaging of stuff, of all the fruit that we're doing. But in production of fruit, there's a lot of use of plastic. The little trees come in little plastic bags. Very often there are plastic weed mats. The overhead nets. So I would imagine you have a busy job dealing with how all of that stuff is dealt with as well.
Yeah. So we as Hortgro do not do any kind of implementation at a farm level. It's a more oversight and an advisory role and a support role. Each business is run on its own. So each business has to ensure that they meet their own environmental targets, their own social targets, and their own governance issues. That's the ESG compliance we're talking about. So we have CISA, which is the Sustainability Institute of South Africa. They are basically like a bridge between the global requirements of for market access and what our national requirements are and how people are performing. So CISA standards are very reputable. And within the CISA standards, they've got things on management of like all the environmental stuff, management of water resource, how much of energy and electricity you consume, how you manage your chemicals on your farm, what do you do with your plastic, do you recycle, etc. So there's all these different parts of the standard that you need to comply with. And then when you go through that, you either get a rating, you can a compliance rating, or you don't, or you got certain things that you got to correct in order to get that so that you can trade. So that is for us the Bible of what is needed at a farm level. So the CISA audits, and this is mostly for our exporters, the CISA audits are fundamental, and it is really such a reputable acknowledged means of ensuring ESG at a farm level. So we would then, for example, have, if there are issues with nets, and if it's across the whole deciduous fruit industry and people want suggestions, etc., that's something we can bring back in for communication, for strategizing, research, etc. So we attend to the needs of the industry as based on demand and what's needed at that time. But actual level, farm level stuff is really the mandate of the farmers. They have that I would say autonomy to run their farms the way they would run a business and comply with the requirements needed for market access. Yeah.
100%. And we know Caesar, we know what they do, and we know the awesome things that they've developed and how they serve all of the export industries in our country. So yes, we know about Caesar. But what I'm saying is, there's not just plastic in the packaging. It goes all the way through. And it's really nice to know that there is something in place that is managing that stuff.
Yeah. So from a packhouse level, that's what our exporters get, which is why it's so fundamentally important for us to address that in terms of compliance there. But the Caesar also take care of the on-farm management.
If we might change the topic from plastics a little bit. I know that while we were trying to get this all set up, you said that you couldn't do a specific date because you were doing a course on carbon credits.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
I can. It's still very new for me, in my head, in my brain.
But for somebody that's got 20 years of experience in managing all these kind of things.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yes, because again, what we know
is dangerous.
Like Louise always said, it's enough to get you into trouble, not enough to get you out.
Yeah.
So, and we have worked with other carbon companies that do certain things in South Africa, but not in agriculture.
Let's talk that.
Please tell us about that.
Okay, so for example, the carbon crediting course I did was with the Sustainability Institute, really well facilitated, really amazing information. It was mind-blowing. I really had the time of my life learning all these new concepts, demystifying everything, because it's quite overwhelming.
Yes.
And as much as you see carbon crediting as an environmental thing, it's actually an accounting, economic thing, more than anything, with an auditing system and an accreditation. So it's not as if I'm equipped to go and do it.
Yes.
It was just an understanding of how it works.
Exactly.
What's lucrative, what's not. Yes.
Nobody knows exactly how it works.
So essentially the carbon credit is, okay, let's go back a bit. So I talked about the UNFCCC, which is a framework on the climate change. Then the Paris Agreement was born from that in the 2015, 2016. 2015, actually. So the Paris Agreement is basically something, it's like a global agreement, and countries need to ensure how they are going to meet those targets for reducing global warming. So there's something called the NDC, which is the nationally determined contributions, which is basically like, how much of carbon emissions am I going to allocate to South Africa for the next couple of years so that they can then reduce their carbon emissions? So that's something that each country needs to develop. South Africa has just gazetted, or is in the process of gazetting, our second iteration of our nationally determined contributions, which is basically how much of carbon we are declaring we want to reduce, what we're emitting now, what we want to reduce, and by when. So it's basically what a load of carbon is, for example. And then that goes down to each sector, and there's sectoral emission targets. So for example, agriculture would get a sector emission target.
Yeah. But
agriculture it's huge. It's not just fruit, it's meat. And we know meat has got a lot of methane and greenhouse gases. There's grain, and then there's fruit, etc. So there's different commodity group, but it's lumped together. So we're working with the Department of Agriculture to actually look at that more in a refined way, where we actually would know, as a commodity, as fruit, for example, what is our allowed target and what is our benchmark, etc. So there's that. But the most fundamentally important thing with the whole carbon crediting system is that it's a system that can help businesses to realize there is potential for me to go and reduce my carbon emissions. I can either sell it and trade it, and there's a whole method for that, or I can offset it, meaning I can do something within my business, in my value chain. Like I can use renewable energy to decrease my reliance on dirty fossil fuel. And the amount of carbon dioxide that I save there, I can actually say, okay, now I'm going to still run my cold storage on this. So I can offset it so that my whole business carbon emission is not higher than what it's supposed to be. So that we call that net zero basis.
Okay.
So you can do that offsetting either within your business or in another area, but you offset your carbon. Your carbon emissions, basically. But
Sounds like cryptocurrency.
it is. It's very out there. So there are two ways of carbon trading. You get the regulatory carbon trading, and that's where the way South Africa has gone. We've got now a Carbon Tax Act of 2019.
Okay.
Basically, the Carbon Tax Act has got an amount that you would pay. It's like a fine. If you can say it, but it's the amount.
Who do you pay that to? To the government?
It'll go into the national treasury,
Okay.
and then that goes. There's still a mechanism for how it gets used. So the Tax Act, and I stand under correction. At one stage, we set each ton of carbon would cost 120 rand, and now I think in 2022 it went up to 200 and something. So it's an escalating tax that you would then be charged for how much you emit. But remember, I mean, fruit is quite a small contributor to greenhouse gases compared to others. So the key focus in the Climate Act that we've got, 2024 Act, is like cement production and electricity generation and those big carbon emitting. So they would get impose a certain budget for how much they're supposed to reduce the carbon emission. So the carbon trading is regulatory. You can go that route, or you can go voluntary carbon trading. And the voluntary carbon trading route is basically you get some company who will help you to understand where your hotspots are in your whole production or your whole value chain, help you to determine your carbon footprint. The carbon footprint is basically like the first thing that you need to do. What your carbon footprint is, where you want to go. So basically you can trade for preventing pollution. So instead of me, if I'm polluting 100 tons of carbon, and I know if I put a solar power, this is just arbitrary figures. If I put a solar power, a PV solar power, I'm going to decrease my 100,000 tons of CO2 emissions by 50. So I'm actually saving 50% of carbon, and that 50 tons of carbon I can trade on the voluntary market because I've put in solar PV now.
Okay.
So it's that kind of it's the trading of the potential of carbon that you are preventing. It's very hard to grapple with it. It's like basically you want to be paid for something you're not doing. So it takes a little bit of getting used to, but it's there. And these are global systems that are regulated. There are specific methodologies that are quite detailed on how a project should be set up, the monitoring of it, the verification, the classification of it, etc. So it's a very vigorous process. And I think once we go through that, it's done, then you start to see things realizing. So we've got a recycling project in Stellenbosch that is already getting carbon credits for the amount of plastics and waste that is not going to a landfill. And that's translated into tons of carbon emissions that are being
saved.
Yeah, prevented. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's the whole thing. And obviously to set up something in agriculture would mean that you need to first understand what your carbon footprint is and how much of potential there is to prevent further emissions. And as agriculture, we're still very dependent on our dirty fuel source. So we're trying to encourage the use of solar PV. There are companies that are already getting credits for solar PV installations. So that's actually is tangible, but it's still a new topic, and you get reputable companies and you get not so reputable companies, which is why it's got a bad rapport, because I think people just went down a rabbit hole and couldn't get themselves out of it. But they are really good, reputable companies, and the courses that I've been to had banks and companies, and it was really quite an eye opener to see that fundamentally people are doing it. And it's happening, and it's tangible, and it's not like impossible.
That's one of the things, because there are farmers that could actually supplement a little bit of their income. So they, instead of getting 100 Rand back onto the farm per box, it could actually become 120 Rand. And that 20 Rand could be a carbon credit. I'm also, again, just I'm sucking some figures here.
Okay.
If they do certain things. Obviously,
Yeah.
it's not going to be tomorrow or next season. It'll have to
Yeah.
build, but it could happen in the future for your children,
Mm-hmm.
or whoever takes the farm over, that you've already got those things in place that
Yeah.
you can actually produce less and still get the same, or produce more and
Yeah. Or
earn
produce more
more.
efficiently, which is what resource efficiency
Yes.
is about.
Yes.
So, for example, I'm using less chemicals on my farm. I'm preventing certain things, and I can use that towards carbon credit. If I'm using less electricity in pumping or irrigation or whatever,
Yes.
that becomes a credit. So the most important thing is that carbon footprint. And you talked about the pricing of it. That carbon tax act that we've got is not going to disappear and go away. It is going to penalize for
Who's going to measure that?
entities have the responsibility, like that ESG compliance. They have to measure and monitor.
Yeah,
that as
but
well.
there will need to be a Caesar of that. Is your carbon
This
compliance?
is a national act. Obviously, we don't know what the dispensation is in terms of whether there will be regional mandate for that, or local municipality or district municipality. But when the sectors have been determined, or when people want to trade, for example, the CBAM. Okay, we go back to the EU and that farm to fork strategy.
Yes.
One of the things that they're wanting to institute is a CBAM, which is a carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is basically a carbon trading tax.
Okay.
So that those exporting companies or any imports that come into the EU will get taxed based on the carbon emissions for the transportation, for the production, etc. So that our prices are relative to that what is the product is relative to what's being produced locally, and then there's a comparison. So we don't want to be penalized for that CBAM because it is going to be in euros. It's not going to be cheap, and it's going to be set at a price that they determine. So hence, we're trying to do everything on our side to reduce the carbon footprint so that you don't get heavily taxed. Because once you already reduce your carbon footprint and you get charged a carbon tax in South Africa, which is why the regulatory framework came in, then you actually get a difference between the costing of the CBAM and South Africa's penalization, basically.
They should call it a carbon tariff, because then everybody will understand what it is.
Yeah, so we'll I don't know. They may just.
That's a scary thing because, I mean, if you look at our fruit, it is perishable. So we already started with the plastic. Okay, we've dealt with that. Then it's got to be refrigerated.
Yeah,
which is
huge energy cost.
Yes. And then it's got to be put on a ship, and that ship is driven to the other hemisphere
By diesel.
by fuel. So by the time you get there, compared to an apple that's grown on a tree in, I don't know, in Holland, it's going to be a difficult hurdle to cross. Another hurdle for
Huge
our industry.
economic challenge. Yeah.
Yeah.
So look, I see opportunities in South Africa that somebody needs to be there that does these regulatory things, and that company needs to start setting up now. By when the time they say, right, it needs to be verified by a municipality, because where they're going to find people in a municipality that will be able to do that?
Yeah.
They're going to have to either outsource it or import somebody that knows.
Yeah, and that takes years.
Exactly. So
An act to just be out is fine, but it takes like 5 years to modify the act and to amend the act, and then the regulations that come underneath that goes through a vigorous process. That takes another 5 years. So we're already trying to get the carbon footprinting stuff sorted out for our industry. So at least if you know what your carbon footprint is, you know where you're losing your resources, you can put in measures and investment to curb that cost or to circumvent the loss that you would have on an economic sense. And we all know if you start now, 5 years from now, it's going to be much easier. So the carbon footprinting has been one of the big projects that we have. The fruit and wine industry started something called the Confronting Climate Change Initiative. And in there, we developed a carbon calculator for our fruit and wine industries who are using it. And they're getting their carbon calculation is being done since 2008, actually. We started the interventions. And from 2011, we've already got a benchmark as to where we are in terms of what is using the most energy, what can be reduced, how, etc. So companies are using that benchmarking report to make the investment and make the changes so that they do not, at the end of the day, sit with this huge carbon responsibility or burden at the end of the day.
How many people are using that?
I stand under correction, but quite a lot. Fruit and wine, we've got a majority of them on.
Oh, wow.
Every quarterly, we have a report in terms of users and the licenses. I don't have those figures
Yeah,
offhand,
yeah, well,
but it's predominantly, yeah.
Interesting.
There's been quite a surge and uprising as well with the wine industry being part of it, because SDG, ESG,
Yeah.
carbon footprinting has become a huge topic.
Yeah.
So the adoption of that carbon calculator, that's not the only carbon calculator, but obviously that's the one we want people to use
Yeah.
because we've developed it with the emission factors that are relevant to us in South Africa. The international one may not have the emission factors taken into consideration for using our fuel source. Or it could have different variances in there that will maybe skewing something off. So we're trying to compare apples with apples and use the one so that it can be compared
Interesting.
for us. Yeah.
Nitasha, we've spoken about so many things and our time is almost up. But there must be things, important things that we didn't discuss. If you could just, like, we discussed plastics at quite length. We discussed carbon and carbon footprinting and all of that. In the field that you work in, what are the other, just like bullet points? What are the
Yes.
other,
Oh,
what
so
are the
many.
other, give us a few of the other things that you don't have to go into detail because we
Yeah.
don't have time, but what are the things we could have spoken
no,
about?
no pun intended, but the low-hanging fruit.
There you go, the low-hanging
I'll
fruit.
always intend the pun.
Yes.
The climate change.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, climate change has got a huge economic impact on our farmers, and it's sad. That's the biggest challenge. So at Hortgro, we've developed the climate change response strategy for our deciduous fruit industry. And that basically has mitigation, adaptation, the communication, all the institutional arrangements, the soft skills, all of that are needed to ensure that our fruit producers are more resilient. And that includes smart agriculture. So smart agriculture is, and very quickly, which is one of the big things that I'm doing. Smart agriculture, driving good agricultural practices is one, but smart agriculture is like soil management. If we don't take care of our soils, we are going to see the impacts of climate change much quicker. So soil health is a big drive, and you can increase soil health by cover cropping, no tillage, putting in organic composts or organic implements, and then also looking for ways of integrated pest management also actually helps the soil, so you don't suffocate the soil. And then we've got things like water and energy stuff that we want to do with smart agriculture. So how are we using our resources? How are we maintaining those resources? Then we've got precision agriculture, making sure our efficiency is on par with that. And then there's a couple, I think I had written down a couple of things. Climate resilient root stocks and root varieties. Those things are so important. So Hortgro Science is doing a lot to understand climate resilience and root stocks and varieties that are going to help us. We've got the climate change app, which basically is an online tool that shows farmers how their microclimates are changing and what they can do in the face of that.
Is that Fruit Look?
No, it's our climate change app, which is then taking years of climate change data for the different regional areas and just giving practical solutions to farmers in designated areas on what to do. So our major predominant farming areas is the Western Cape and the Langkloof in the Eastern Cape areas, and Montague, the Sierras area, and then the Krabo area. So it's looking around that, with the small percentages in other parts of the country. So those are the big things. There's an online research library. Our Hortgro Science has got an amazing resource in terms of all the studies we've done and funded, all the research outcomes, all the things that are relevant, all the communication channels with our fresh quarterly newsletters, and all the different things that we are communicating to our growers and our stakeholders. It's all available on our website and online. We're big on the whole webinar thing as well. So our footprint webinar has really just blown away. We've done one on soil health. We did 2 webinars on green financing, which includes the financial institutions, which is so great. And then we had one on the packaging.
I saw that one. I watched it. In fact, I went
Yes.
looking for it and found it.
So there
Yes.
has, just to get people understanding, not to panic, but that's it. And then we're going to have our next one in October on how to be a carbon hero. So a carbon hero is a badge that you get for being carbon conscious and how to do the calculation.
Very cool.
Yes. And then the last one we want to do is on water and energy efficiency, because we're doing water benchmarking and energy efficiency at our farm level and pack houses. So we're doing quite a few things, and driving smart agriculture is really important. And the investment is because our producers have to invest. So it's not just something that it's nice to do. It's really important to get the efficiency you need so that your business can be thriving, so that you can be ESG compliant, and you can actually be prepared in the face of climate change and all those mitigation stuff that
Sounds like you will definitely have to come back and talk to us again, and you've got work for the rest of your life.
Yes.
Until
I retire at least.
Well, nobody retires these days anymore. The person that's going to live to 200 has already been born.
Yeah.
So you've been in this industry now for just over a year and a half, am I correct?
Just under a year and a half.
Yeah, okay. So what in this year and a half that you've seen and learned in this industry has got you the most excited?
I love research. I really do, because it's mind-blowing to think of the capacity that we have as a human species. I mean, the fourth industrial revolution is here.
Yes.
People are talking about smart agriculture and precision agriculture and remote sensing and machine learning. I mean, these are brand new stuff. We talked about carbon credit, which is so woohoo. It's so virtual. But it's things that are happening, and it's happening at such a fast pace that it's bringing in new thinking and new ways of doing things better, efficiently, etc. And at the end of the day, the fruit sells. The fruit has to be the thing that drives us all.
Yes.
And our farmers are so committed. Our producers have got farms that they hand over generation to generation. So they obviously have a vested impact and a vested interest in doing the right thing. Good agricultural practices, keeping communication open. And it's always not so easy and not so lekker to say, oh, and you got to do this. And it's not so nice. But I think our farmers are very brave. And for me, that when I look at them and I look at the farming operations and how intensive it is, it's just so inspiring to know that farmers are doing the best, plus they're giving to community, and they're taking into consideration all these global auditing, reporting requirements, which is not easy. And I look at that and I just think I've got nothing to complain about, because that is hard work. And that's where the hard work is. So supporting somebody who's doing something and wants to do the right thing, for me, is very rewarding. It gets me excited. And I really want to contribute to that as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Incredible. Well, thank you so much for sharing and discussing all these issues with us. We have a tradition on our podcast, and that is one of the previous people that we spoke to leaves a random question for one of the future people, and you are one of those people.
And we're going to get one from you as well.
Yes, and we'll get a one from you as well.
The guest that was here just before you left one, which is actually quite cool. And we'll tell you afterwards who it was.
I did already.
Oh, well, you shouldn't do that. What is your favorite and least favorite part of working in the agri-industry? I think you just described your favorite part just now.
Yes, I did.
So what's the least favorite part?
I think the least favorite part is probably, firstly, there's two parts to that. The least favorite part is that we're in and because I'm in the environmental field, in the agriculture, it's a little bit of a two-pronged thing.
Yes.
There's constant change. Regulations are changing, requirement is changing, climate is changing, everything is constantly changing. And having to be at the forefront of that and still keep a brave face is really hard. We've had floods. We've seen what it did to our farmers, what it did to communities. And I think the least favorite thing for me to see is orchards being pulled out because there's not enough water. And that's heartbreaking to see communities don't have work anymore because it's not a thriving business or it's not a thriving industry to be in anymore. So it's a constant uncertainty I think. And I mean, in the face of adversities, we have to be strong. But it's really hard to be strong sometimes
Yes.
and to be positive when things are falling apart around you. And you just got to hold it together and know that something good will come from it, or that you just got to push a little more to get there. Yeah.
That's
That's
a
hard.
very real and very honest
Yes.
answer, and it's we see it too, and we know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
It's hard.
So that's the one thing on the more local element. On the global element, we have all the trade issues, like with the USA and all the alarming stuff that comes. So because we're a country that exports to 86 different countries, there's always constant change. And we have to keep abreast to that. And it's always being busy. You feel like you're always being responsive or reactive, and it's hard to like really plan ahead. But I mean, that's just what we're doing in agriculture.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for coming to
A
join
question
us.
from me, but I have no idea. I didn't prepare myself. For
That's
that.
fine.
We'll talk about it just now.
Okay, so
When
I
we're
can give
done.
it to you later.
Thank you so much for coming.
You're so welcome. I'm a gift that keeps giving.
No, we're going to have you more. You're going to come give us some more in the near future. We know that.
Thanks, Natasha.
Thank